In this video, we're going to be diving into the React use effect, understanding what it means, how to use it, and when to use it. But before we go into the practical, ask yourself, what is the React use effect? So I'm going to answer that question. The React use effect is a React hook that lets you perform side effects in function components such as data fetching, which we are going to be doing, manually changing the DOM. So we use it whenever we need to run some code after the component renders or some specific dependency change. Without wasting much time, let's get started. Welcome back. Now, before you can use the React use effect, you need to import it first. And you can see I have imported it just like this, as you are seeing on the screen. Use effect, use state. So now we are going to be starting from the easy to the difficult. We are going to look at how we can manually update DOM, how we can use it to fetch data. All right, so let's get started. Quickly, let me have a span here that says I am a boy, and an ID given to the span which says boy. Also, let me have a button that says change color. Change color. And let me give it an onClick function of change. So now this button, whenever we click on it, we want this color to be changing. And we're going to be doing that using the use effect hook in React. So now I'm going to have my use effects. Use effects. Then I'm going to have this bracket inside it, then the arrow and the curly bracket. All right. Before then, I'm going to create something to monitor the state of this. So I'm going to be using the React use state, right? And in my previous video, I've explained the React use state. So I'm not going to be wasting much time on it. So let me just have my const. Then let me create a variable called mode and update mode. And let me set it to be equals to use state false. So whenever we click on this button, we are going to change between, or we are going to toggle between false and true. So this is where we are going to be using the use effect, but let us create the function for the change color. I've given it an onClick function of change, so let us create that function change. All right, so whenever we click on it using the React use state, which I explained in the previous video, you can check out the video on my YouTube channel. So we're going to say update, then we're going to set it to be equals to the opposite of mode. So let's say since the mode is false initially, when we click on the button, it's going to change to true. Now when we click on the button, it's going to change to false, because we are changing it to the opposite of mode. That's the current Boolean state of mode. Now, it is this sign that makes it to be the opposite of what mode is. All right, now using the use effect, we're not going to be checking. We're going to manually updating our DOM. We're going to say if mode is equals to true. But before then, let us create a variable called boy to be equals to document.getElements by ID, and we are getting boy. That's this ID we gave it here. So now in our if statement, we're going to say if mode is equals to true, boy.style.color should be equals to red. Then we're going to say, sorry, should be in a quote, red. Then we're going to say else boy.style.color should be equals to green. All right, so let's check out our code and see. Now we can see the current state now is green. Why? Because it is false. The color only changes to red when mode is true. So when we click on change color, it changes to red. That means the mode is true. When we click on it, it changes to green. So now we can use the use effect to manually update the DOM. Now let's move to a more advanced part, using the use effect to fetch data. So you can use the use effect to fetch data. Let's say you have a backend connected, you can use the use effect to fetch data from it. But since we are not having a backend connected, we are going to be fetching from an open URL. And what is this open URL? Let me head on to my browser. So we are going to be fetching from JSON. You can see JSON placeholder.ipcode.com/user. Now when we click on it, it returns some list of users. So this is where we are going to be fetching from. So let me just copy the code. So let's go back. Now let me just clean this up. Let me clean all this up. So now to use the useEffect to fetch, the first thing I have to do, I have my useEffect ready. useEffect, my bracket, I have under bracket, then the arrow and this. So now we are going to be using the async function, that's a reserved word in React and JavaScript to fetch. Note, let this be on an empty dependencies. So it just run once. So now we are going to say async. We can see it async. Then we are going to have function. Now the next thing after writing this is to give it a name. So let's call it fetch data. All right. So now what we are going to do, we are going to do two things. We are going to be trying. We are going to try. All right. And also we are going to catch. These are two things we are going to do. So the code we are going to be writing now will either be inside try and catch. So let's start with the try. So we want to fetch. So we are going to create a random variable, but me, I'm calling it, I'm going to call my own random variable response. So I'm going to say let response be equals to, now since we're using a sync function, we're going to await. So we're going to say await, then we're going to use another JS reserve word, which is fetch. We're going to say fetch. Then where are we fetching from? We're not going to paste the URL we are fetching from. If it is the backend you're also fetching from, you are going to be pasting the URL of the backend here, but ensure that that URL is returning a JSON response. So now it's fetching, we set response to be equals to this, it's fetching from the URL. The next thing is to check if the response is successful. So we're going to say if response.ok. That means if the response is successful, well, now we're going to create another random variable. So we're going to say let data. You can give it any name you wish, just for consistency and to understand what I'm doing. So we're going to let data be equals to, now we're going to await again. We're going to await. Now we're going to say response.json. So this URL is meant to return a JSON response, and this is the response. So now to check, let's quickly console. We're going to console.log to see if what we are doing is correct. Data. Else, we're going to have else. So now we want to display error messages if there's an error. So let's create a variable here called const. We're going to be using the use state. So let's say error, then update error should be equals to use state, but it should be an empty string. So we're going to say else update error. Remember, that's how I explained that we're going to be changing use state in React. Update error should be equals to failed to fetch. All right, now after doing this, the next thing is to catch. That means if it was unable to fetch at all, maybe due to network error. So in this place, we're going to say update error, then we're going to say network error. So now after having this, what is the next thing you do? Now remember, we created a function, so we are going to call this function now, so that when the JavaScript starts, it can start running. So this is the function we created. This is it here, fetch data. This is where it ends, so we're going to call it here fetch data. Now let's check it out first. So sorry, let's add on. It is open there. So let's refresh. Let's Control Shift I and see if we are getting any message. All right, you can see it returns some array. So let's check it. We can see Lynn Graham, name, Evan Owell. So we are fetching. Remember, we are consoling.log to be able to see those response. So we can see it here. Now, how do we display this response in our browser? You see, it's returning them in an array. We're also going to check how to display the error messages. So here, let me have, since we have a variable called error, which is this, I can just call it here by saying error. So now I want this data to be fetching every 1 second. That means if data is adding, it's going to fetch it every 1 second, so we can get a response. All right, so you can check out my video on JavaScript timing function. We already explained all this, so I'm going to be using the set interval. I explained everything in that JavaScript timing function. So I'm going to say fetch data. All right, now in order to be able to give an error immediately when there's a network error, that is this error here, we have to do something. Let's create a variable called cost interval id should be equals to this. So now after this, we're going to return. Don't worry, I'm going to explain this line of code. So what are we returning? We're going to use the clear interval now, and we're going to clear the interval id. So we are doing this in case, let's say I'm connected to the internet before and there's a network error. Immediately it's going to update me by saying the network error. I will not have to refresh before I can be seeing the error messages. So this interval id now, the clear interval, I already explained in that JavaScript timing function. Now the reason why I set this variable to be equals to this is so that this clear interval can know the set interval it is clearing. For example, if I do not give it a variable now, and let's say in my code I have so many set interval for different functions. If I use the clear interval and just call set interval, it's not going to know the interval it's meant to clear. So I have to set it to be equals to a variable. That's why I say const set interval id. So it knows that okay, this interval id, this is what is clearing. All right. So now let me just have a quick error message here by saying ww. So we can see it here. The error message is displaying. So now, right now I'm connected to the internet. So let me just disconnect from the internet. Let me disconnect from it and go back. So it says internet disconnected, and it also told us network error. So now, what of if we are now connected to internet and want to display those data in our web page? That means we want to display those array we are getting in our web page. In order to be able to display those data we are fetching, as you can see all this data in our browser, so I'm going to create another use case. So I'm going to call it const, and I'm going to say user, and I will have update user. So we're going to be using the use state, and I'll make it to be an empty array since what we are retrieving is an empty array. So I'm going to say use state, then it will be an empty array. All right. So so now at this point where we are waiting response and we are setting data to be equals to this, we need to pass this response into this array. So we're going to do that using this update user. So we're going to say update user, then it should be equals to data. All right. So now we are passing this data we are getting into this array. So now we can now display the data in our code. So to display it, we are going to say user.map. We have our bracket, that is this user here, since that's the name we gave to it. So user.map. Then we're going to have another bracket inside this. Then we're going to come out of that bracket we created here. Then we have our arrow function. Then inside this, after this arrow function, we're now going to have another bracket. Then we press enter. So this is what we're going to be writing, what we are going to use to retrieve those data. So let's have a div. Now inside this div, we're now going to say user.name, or let me say, sorry, we're going to create a variable inside this bracket. So let me just call it my user. So now I can now say my user.name. So let's check the browser. Now you can see it's displaying those names. Since they are array, we can retrieve them by mapping them. That is React mapping. So we say user.map. Let me write the code again. We are going to say first user.map. All right, then we have our brackets. Now inside this bracket, we're going to have another bracket. Then we're now going to come outside of this bracket, have our arrow, then we have another bracket, and we'll press enter. So in order to be able to access each of these of the username, so we can create a variable called my user or any variable. So now this is what we're going to be displaying in this div. So we're now going to say my user dot name. All right, that's how we're able to see all this name. Yeah, we already have an ID called name, so that's why we're able to retrieve name. So what you are retrieving, you must have an ID that is equals to it. Please, if you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, don't forget to subscribe and also click the notification bell. I'll be posting more engaging coding tutorial. Thank you.